sky stopped turning dark. The ground began to crack from below, and animals everywhere started behaving as if they were fleeing something unseen. Would you call it coincidence or a warning? In recent months, weather patterns across the United States have moved far beyond what scientists once considered normal variation. According to data from the National Weather Service and NOAA, the winter of 2025 to 2026 has brought extreme cold waves that stretched from the Midwest deep into southern states. Regions that historically were not built to endure such prolonged freezing conditions. Temperatures dropped sharply across wide areas, and when combined with sustained high winds, the actual danger was far greater than what the numbers alone suggested. Exposure that might have once been considered manageable became life-threatening within minutes. At the same time, snowfall was not light or seasonal in the traditional sense. It accumulated heavily, forming dense layers that placed enormous weight on infrastructure. Reports from multiple states confirmed roof collapses in warehouses, parking structures, and residential buildings. Transportation systems were disrupted at every level. Roads disappeared under thick snow, vehicles were stranded in place, and entire neighborhoods were effectively isolated for extended periods. According to coverage from the New York Times, this was not simply a matter of severe winter conditions, but a pattern where multiple extreme elements were occurring simultaneously and repeatedly. Storm systems began arriving closer together, often before communities had time to recover from the previous one. Winds drove snow sideways across highways, eliminating visibility and forcing major routes to shut down. Air travel was heavily impacted, with thousands of delays and cancellations, leaving airports crowded with passengers uncertain about when normal operations would resume. What made this situation particularly unusual was not just the intensity of individual storms, but the overlap between different types of events. In several regions, heavy snowfall was followed almost immediately by rising temperatures and rainfall, leading to rapid snowmelt and sudden flooding. This combination created conditions that most infrastructure systems were never designed to handle at the same time. Drainage systems built for rain struggled to function under freezing conditions. Roads weakened by ice became hazardous when flooded. Emergency services were stretched thin as they attempted to respond to multiple types of crises simultaneously. The pattern that emerged was not one of isolated incidents, but of compounded pressure, where each new event added strain to systems that had not yet recovered from the last. From a scientific perspective, these events can be analyzed in terms of climate variability, atmospheric shifts, and long-term environmental trends. However, the timing and convergence of these phenomena raise a different kind of question. In the Bible, Matthew 24:7 states that there will be multiple disturbances occurring across different regions at the same time. The verse does not focus on a single disaster, but on the pattern of increasing frequency and overlap. This perspective does not reject scientific explanation, but it frames the situation in a broader context. It suggests that the significance may not lie in any one event, but in the way they are happening together. As these conditions continued, another pattern became increasingly clear, not in the environment, but in human behavior. At the beginning of such events, public response is typically strong. People pay attention to warnings, follow updates, and adjust their behavior accordingly. However, as these events become more frequent, something begins to change. According to research from Pew Research Center, repeated exposure to crisis-related information can lead to a measurable decline in emotional response and engagement. What once triggered concern gradually becomes familiar, and familiarity reduces urgency. This shift is subtle but significant. When alerts appear repeatedly on screens, they begin to blend into the background of daily life. Weather warnings, emergency notifications, and breaking news reports become part of a constant stream of information, competing for attention with entertainment, social media, and routine communication. The result is not a lack of awareness, but a reduced capacity to react. People still see the information, but it no longer carries the same weight. In the Bible, Amos 6:6 describes a condition where people are no longer troubled by the decline happening around them. This is not because the decline is hidden, but because the emotional response has weakened. The concern is not ignorance, but indifference. When disruption becomes expected, it loses its power to interrupt. When warning signs appear often enough, they stop being perceived as warnings. This creates a situation that is more dangerous than the events themselves. A severe storm can cause damage, but it is temporary. A weakened response to warning signs, however, affects how people prepare, how they prioritize, and how they make decisions over time. It changes the relationship between cause and reaction. Instead of responding quickly and decisively, people begin to delay, to assume that the situation is manageable or that it will pass without significant consequence. This pattern can be observed across different levels of society. Individuals continue daily routines despite increasing disruptions. Communities adapt to new conditions without fully addressing the underlying causes. Systems designed for stability are forced to operate under continuous stress. The danger is not only in what is happening externally, but in how the internal response is shifting. The Bible presents this pattern as a warning in itself. It suggests that the most critical moment is not when events begin, but when people stop responding to them. When awareness fades, the ability to recognize significance fades with it. This does not happen suddenly. It develops gradually, through repeated exposure and diminishing reaction. At this point, the question is no longer limited to weather or environment. It becomes a question about perception and readiness. If signs are present but no longer recognized as signs, what happens next? If warnings continue but fail to produce reflection or change, what is the outcome of that silence? And perhaps the most important question of all is this: are these events becoming more normal? Or are we simply becoming more accustomed to them? As these environmental disruptions continue to unfold across the country, attention has not remained fixed on the ground alone. Increasingly, people have begun to look upward, not out of curiosity, but because something about the sky itself no longer feels consistent with what they have known all their lives. In multiple regions across the United States, residents have reported that night no longer arrives in the way it once did. The transition from evening into full darkness has become incomplete, interrupted by a persistent glow that lingers across the sky for hours without a clear or familiar source. According to observations and atmospheric studies associated with NASA, this phenomenon can be partially explained through the interaction between artificial light and atmospheric particles. Urban light pollution, when combined with certain weather conditions, such as low cloud cover or suspended particulate matter, can scatter and reflect light across wide areas, creating a diffuse brightness that extends far beyond city limits. In technical terms, this is not a new concept. However, what is new is the scale, frequency, and geographic spread of the effect, particularly in areas that historically experienced clear and distinct night cycles. What makes this situation more significant is not simply the presence of light, but the absence of true darkness. Darkness has always played a critical role in regulating biological and psychological systems. Research conducted by Harvard Medical School has shown that exposure to artificial light during nighttime hours directly interferes with the body's circadian rhythm, the internal system responsible for regulating sleep cycles, hormone production, and overall physiological balance. When natural darkness is reduced or eliminated, melatonin production is disrupted, leading to sleep disturbances, increased stress levels, and long-term impacts on mental and physical health. These effects are not limited to humans. Wildlife depends heavily on consistent light and dark cycles to guide behaviors such as migration, feeding, and reproduction. When those cycles are altered, even slightly, the consequences can ripple through entire ecosystems. Birds may remain active long after they should be resting. Nocturnal animals may lose their ability to navigate effectively. Predatory and prey relationships can shift in ways that destabilize established patterns. These changes are measurable, observable, and increasingly documented. However, beyond the scientific explanation lies a deeper layer of significance that cannot be measured through data alone. In the biblical context, darkness is not merely the absence of light. It represents a necessary condition for reflection, for stillness, and for awareness of something beyond the immediate environment. Psalm 19 states that the heavens declare the glory of God, and that the sky above proclaims His handiwork. This declaration is not only visible during the day, but becomes even more profound at night, when the vastness of the universe is revealed through the stars. When the night sky is no longer visible in its natural form, something essential is removed from human experience. The stars are not only distant objects in space, they serve as a constant reminder of scale, of order, and of limits that exist beyond human control. Without that reference, the sense of perspective begins to narrow. The world feels more enclosed, more immediate, and more centered on human activity alone. The loss is not only visual, it is psychological and in many ways spiritual. What is particularly notable is how quickly this change is accepted. Initial reactions often include confusion or concern, but over time, adaptation takes place. Curtains are drawn. Artificial lighting becomes the dominant environment. Screens replace the natural sky as the primary source of visual focus. The unusual becomes routine, and the absence of darkness is no longer questioned. This shift does not require a conscious decision. It happens gradually, through repeated exposure and normalization. At this point, the issue is no longer whether the sky has changed, but whether the change is being recognized for what it represents. If a fundamental aspect of the natural cycle can be altered without sustained attention or response, it raises a broader question about how other changes are being perceived. If the loss of darkness does not interrupt daily life, what else might be changing without being fully acknowledged? As this altered state of the sky continues to influence life above ground, a different kind of disruption has been developing at ground level. One that challenges not perception, but physical boundaries. In several regions, particularly in the Midwest, the winter season has brought not only snow and freezing temperatures, but also significant and unexpected flooding. This combination of conditions has created scenarios that are both rare and difficult to manage. According to reporting from Chicago Tribune, January 2026 recorded unusually high levels of winter rainfall in Chicago, leading to widespread flooding in areas not designed to handle such volumes of water during cold conditions. Streets that are typically stable during winter months became submerged. Underground tunnels filled rapidly. Traffic systems were disrupted as water levels rose faster than drainage systems could respond. What made this situation particularly challenging was the timing. Infrastructure built to manage snow and ice was forced to operate under conditions more typical of spring or summer storms. At the same time, surrounding regions continued to experience snow and freezing temperatures, creating a dual pressure on systems that were never intended to handle both states simultaneously. Ice weakened surfaces, while water added weight and instability. Emergency services faced overlapping demands, responding to incidents related to both freezing and flooding conditions at once. This convergence exposed vulnerabilities that are usually hidden when events occur separately. From a technical standpoint, such flooding can be attributed to factors including rapid temperature fluctuations, saturated ground conditions, and limitations in urban drainage capacity. These explanations are valid and supported by data. However, the broader implication lies in the breakdown of expected boundaries. Seasons are traditionally defined by distinct characteristics. Winter is associated with cold and snow, while flooding is typically linked to warmer periods and heavy rainfall. When these distinctions collapse, predictability is reduced, and systems based on that predictability become less reliable. In the biblical narrative, water is often associated with both life and judgment, depending on the context. Genesis 7:11 describes a moment when water did not only fall from the sky, but also rose from the depths of the earth. This detail emphasizes a complete breakdown of boundaries, where both above and below contribute to a single, overwhelming force. The significance of this description is not limited to the event itself, but to the concept that what is normally contained can become uncontained. When water appears in places where it is not expected, it reveals more than a technical failure. It reveals assumptions that no longer hold true. Systems that were designed with clear distinctions in mind are forced to operate in conditions where those distinctions no longer apply. The result is not just disruption, but uncertainty about what can be relied upon. As changes in the sky and on the surface become more noticeable, attention has also begun to shift downward, toward something far less visible, but potentially more unsettling. In Tennessee, residents encountered a phenomenon that did not follow any familiar pattern of natural disaster. Without rainfall, without flooding, and without any immediate external trigger, water and mud began forcing their way upward through the ground itself. Streets that had appeared stable only hours earlier started to crack. Pavement buckled under pressure. Thick, dark water emerged from beneath the surface, carrying with it a strong odor and a sense of instability that spread quickly through affected areas. According to preliminary explanations from the U.S. Geological Survey, this type of event can occur when underground pressure builds within saturated soil layers, particularly when combined with aging infrastructure such as weakened drainage systems or compromised pipelines. Over time, water accumulates below the surface, and if that pressure is not properly released or managed, it can eventually force its way upward through the path of least resistance. From a technical standpoint, this explanation is consistent with known geological processes. However, what made this situation stand out was not simply the mechanism, but the timing, the intensity, and the direction of the movement. Flooding is typically understood as something that comes from above, whether through rainfall, overflowing rivers, or storm surges. In this case, the movement originated from below, reversing the expected flow. This reversal has both practical and psychological implications. On a practical level, it challenges standard emergency response strategies, which are designed to monitor and react to conditions that develop on the surface. When the source of disruption is hidden beneath the ground, detection becomes more difficult and response times are reduced. On a psychological level, it alters the perception of stability itself. The ground is commonly viewed as the most reliable element in any environment. It is the foundation upon which everything else is built. When that foundation begins to behave unpredictably, it introduces a level of uncertainty that extends beyond the immediate event. Residents in affected areas reported not only physical damage, but also a sense of disorientation. Floors inside homes showed signs of stress. Foundations shifted slightly, enough to raise concern about long-term structural integrity. In some cases, evacuations were necessary, as officials attempted to assess the risk and prevent further harm. What made the situation more difficult to process was the absence of visible warning signs. There were no dark clouds, no rising rivers, and no obvious indicators that something was about to happen. The change occurred suddenly, emerging from a place that is usually hidden from view. This type of event highlights an important characteristic of many systems, both natural and man-made. Pressure can build over time without being immediately noticeable. Conditions below the surface may change gradually, reaching a critical point before any visible sign appears. By the time the surface responds, the underlying process has already been developing for an extended period. This delayed visibility creates a gap between cause and effect, making it more difficult to understand the full scope of what is happening. In the biblical account, moments when the earth opens are not described as random occurrences. They are presented as moments of exposure, when something that has been concealed is suddenly revealed. In Numbers 16, the ground opens and separates what is visible from what lies beneath, creating a clear boundary that is no longer stable. The significance of this description is not limited to the physical event. It emphasizes the idea that hidden conditions, once they reach a certain point, cannot remain hidden indefinitely. When applied to the current situation, this perspective raises a direct and practical question. If pressure beneath the surface is capable of altering the ground itself, what other forms of pressure might be building in areas that have not yet shown visible signs? This is not a question of speculation, but of observation. Systems that appear stable on the surface may still be undergoing changes at deeper levels. The absence of visible disruption does not necessarily indicate the absence of underlying stress. At the same time, it is important to recognize that not every unusual event carries the same meaning or implication. Scientific analysis provides essential tools for understanding mechanisms and identifying causes. Geological surveys, engineering assessments, and environmental monitoring all contribute to a clearer picture of how such events occur. These explanations are necessary and valuable. However, they do not fully address the broader pattern in which multiple types of disruption are emerging across different layers of the environment. When considered alongside the changes already observed in weather patterns and atmospheric conditions, the emergence of activity from below the ground adds another dimension to the overall situation. It is not only the surface that is affected, and not only the sky that is changing, but the space beneath, which is typically the least visible and least considered. This creates a three-dimensional shift in perspective, where attention must extend both upward and downward, rather than remaining focused on a single level. This shift also affects how stability is defined. Stability is often associated with consistency, predictability, and the absence of sudden change. When events begin to challenge these characteristics across multiple layers at once, the concept itself requires re-examination. What was once assumed to be fixed may need to be understood as conditional. What was once considered secure may depend on factors that are not immediately visible. The response to such changes depends largely on awareness and interpretation. If events are viewed only in isolation, each one can be explained and managed individually. However, when patterns begin to form across different domains, the interpretation becomes more complex. It is no longer sufficient to ask what is happening in one location or at one level. The more relevant question becomes how these events relate to each other and what they indicate when considered together. As this process continues, the distinction between visible and hidden factors becomes increasingly important. Surface conditions can change quickly and attract immediate attention. Subsurface conditions, by contrast, develop more slowly and are often overlooked until they reach a point of manifestation. Understanding both aspects is essential for forming a complete picture of the current environment. This leads to a final consideration that connects directly to the broader theme established earlier. If changes are occurring above, on the surface, and below, and if these changes are not following familiar patterns, then the issue is not limited to any single category. It becomes a question of overall alignment. Are the systems that govern natural processes maintaining their established relationships? Or are those relationships shifting in ways that require a different level of attention? As attention continues to move beyond what can be seen on the surface, the focus naturally shifts deeper into places that are rarely observed and even less understood. While earlier events challenged stability above and around human environments, new reports have begun to draw attention to what is happening far beneath the ground, in spaces where light does not reach and where perception depends almost entirely on sound. Within the Mammoth Cave system, recognized as the longest known cave network in the world, explorers and researchers have reported a series of unusual auditory experiences that do not align with typical cave acoustics. The Mammoth Cave system has been studied for decades, and many of its acoustic behaviors are well documented. Sound in caves is known to travel in complex ways, influenced by chamber size, surface texture, airflow, and the presence of water. Under normal conditions, echoes are sharp, predictable, and directly linked to identifiable sources such as footsteps, dripping water, or shifting air currents. However, recent reports describe something different. Explorers have noted low-frequency sounds that are sustained over time, moving through the cave in ways that feel continuous rather than reactive. These sounds do not resemble the quick reflections of an echo. Instead, they carry a depth and persistence that creates uncertainty about their origin. According to geological and acoustic analysis, possible explanations include air moving through narrow passages, changes in underground water flow, or resonance within large chambers. These mechanisms are supported by scientific understanding and can produce complex sound patterns under certain conditions. However, in several documented cases, the reported sounds appeared without corresponding changes in air pressure, water movement, or other measurable environmental factors. This gap between observation and explanation does not invalidate the scientific models, but it indicates that not every instance fits neatly within existing frameworks. What makes these experiences particularly significant is the environment in which they occur. In total darkness, where visual reference points are absent, sound becomes the primary means of orientation. Any deviation from expected acoustic behavior is therefore more noticeable and more difficult to ignore. Explorers have described a distinct sense that the space around them is not entirely static, even when no movement can be seen. This perception is not necessarily based on fear, but on the recognition that the environment is behaving in a way that is not fully understood. In the biblical context, the concept of the deep is often associated with what lies beyond human comprehension. It represents areas that are not only physically hidden, but also symbolically beyond reach. The deep is not presented as something that must be explored at all costs, but as something that exists with its own boundaries. When those boundaries are approached or crossed, the experience is often accompanied by a realization of limitation. The focus shifts from discovery to awareness, from what can be found to what should be pursued. As human exploration continues to expand into previously uncharted spaces, both above ground and below, the question becomes more specific. It is no longer limited to what exists in these environments, but extends to the purpose and direction of the exploration itself. The presence of unexplained phenomena does not automatically imply danger, but it does highlight the limits of current understanding. When those limits are reached, the appropriate response is not always to push further without consideration. In some cases, it is to recognize that not all spaces are meant to be fully defined or controlled. This perspective does not conflict with scientific inquiry. Instead, it adds a layer of context that emphasizes responsibility and awareness. Exploration has always been driven by the desire to understand. But understanding is not achieved solely through expansion. It also requires the ability to recognize boundaries and to interpret signals that indicate when those boundaries are being approached. The unease reported by explorers is not necessarily caused by the environment itself, but by the recognition that the environment operates according to principles that are not yet fully known. As this realization takes shape in one area, a similar pattern begins to emerge in another. This time not in natural formations, but in objects created and used by human cultures in the past. Across the southwestern United States, ancient obsidian mirrors have drawn renewed attention from both researchers and the public. These objects, formed from volcanic glass, possess unique physical properties that distinguish them from more common reflective surfaces. Obsidian absorbs light in a way that creates a deep, dark appearance. And under low light conditions, it can produce subtle visual effects that are difficult to interpret. Archaeological studies conducted by the Smithsonian Institution have confirmed that these mirrors were not designed for ordinary reflection. They were used in ritual contexts, often associated with practices intended to access knowledge or perception beyond what is immediately visible. In these settings, the mirror was not a tool for observing the physical self, but for engaging with concepts that were considered hidden or inaccessible through normal means. From a scientific perspective, the visual effects produced by obsidian can be explained through the interaction between light, surface texture, and human perception. In low-light environments, the human eye struggles to establish clear reference points, and the reflective properties of obsidian can amplify this effect, creating the impression of movement or depth where none physically exists. These explanations are consistent with known principles of optics and psychology. However, the historical use of these objects introduces a different dimension to their significance. The use of obsidian mirrors in ritual contexts reflects a broader human tendency to seek understanding beyond observable reality. This tendency is not limited to any one culture or time period. It appears repeatedly across history in various forms, from divination practices to symbolic systems designed to interpret hidden meanings. In each case, the underlying motivation is similar. It is driven by the desire to extend perception beyond its natural limits. In Isaiah 8:19, the Bible addresses this impulse directly by questioning why people seek guidance from hidden or indirect sources rather than from a clear and established foundation. The focus of the passage is not on the objects themselves, but on the direction of the search. It suggests that the issue is not the existence of unknown elements, but the method by which people attempt to engage with them. When this perspective is applied to the present context, a pattern becomes visible. In one instance, exploration moves deeper into the physical environment, encountering limits of understanding within natural systems. In another, attention turns to objects that were historically used to access or interpret what could not be seen directly. In both cases, the common element is the pursuit of knowledge beyond immediate perception. This pursuit is not inherently negative. It has led to significant advancements in science, technology, and culture. However, it also carries a requirement for clarity regarding purpose and limitation. When the desire to know becomes disconnected from an understanding of boundaries, the result can be confusion rather than insight. The presence of unexplained phenomena, whether in caves or in reflective surfaces, does not automatically provide answers. It often raises additional questions that require careful interpretation. At this stage, the connection between different areas of observation becomes more apparent. Changes in the environment, both visible and hidden, are accompanied by shifts in how those changes are perceived and interpreted. The physical world presents new patterns, and human response attempts to keep pace with those patterns through exploration and analysis. The challenge lies in maintaining a balance between seeking understanding and recognizing the limits within which that understanding can be pursued. As these developments continue, the central question remains consistent. It is not only about what is happening, but about how it is being approached. When unfamiliar conditions appear, the response can take multiple forms. It can focus on explanation, on adaptation, or on deeper reflection. Each approach provides a different kind of insight, and the combination of these approaches determines how effectively the situation is understood. What is clear is that the environment, both above and below, is presenting signals that require attention. These signals are not always direct, and they do not always produce immediate clarity. However, they contribute to a broader pattern that connects physical events with human perception. Understanding that pattern requires not only observation, but also the ability to interpret what those observations mean within a larger context. As the pattern of unusual events continues to expand across different layers of the environment, another shift becomes increasingly visible, not in isolated locations, but across living systems themselves. What is changing is no longer limited to weather, atmosphere, or underground pressure. It is now observable in the behavior of plants and animals, systems that typically respond slowly and predictably to environmental conditions. In California, Joshua trees, which have long been recognized for their distinct and consistent form, are beginning to show irregular growth patterns that differ noticeably from what has been observed over generations. Instead of growing upright with relatively stable branching structures, some of these trees now appear twisted, uneven, and distorted in ways that are difficult to attribute solely to typical environmental stress. Researchers have proposed several possible explanations, including prolonged drought conditions, soil changes, and temperature fluctuations. These factors are known to influence plant growth, and in many cases, they can account for gradual variations. However, the forms currently being observed in certain regions do not follow the usual patterns of adaptation. Instead of gradual adjustment, the changes appear more abrupt and structurally inconsistent, suggesting that multiple variables may be interacting at once. In some areas, these distortions are concentrated near zones associated with geological irregularities and stronger magnetic activity, adding another layer of complexity to the analysis. At the same time, animal behavior across the United States has shown a noticeable shift. According to data from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, there has been a significant increase in wildlife entering human-populated areas in recent years. This includes large mammals such as bears appearing in residential neighborhoods, as well as smaller species that are now being observed in locations where they were previously uncommon. These movements are not random. They reflect changes in habitat conditions, food availability, and environmental stability. What makes this situation particularly important is the consistency of the pattern across different species and regions. Animals that once avoided human presence are now approaching it with reduced caution. Birds are altering migration and activity cycles. Marine life is appearing closer to shore than expected. Each of these changes can be explained individually through ecological factors such as habitat disruption, climate variation, and resource scarcity. However, when these behaviors occur simultaneously across multiple systems, the pattern becomes more significant. In Hosea 4:3, the Bible describes a condition in which the land itself is affected, along with the creatures that depend on it. The passage states that the beasts of the field, the birds of the sky, and the fish of the sea are all impacted. This description does not present nature as separate from human activity. Instead, it portrays a connected system in which changes in one area influence all others. The emphasis is not on a single cause, but on the relationship between human behavior and the broader environment. From a practical perspective, this connection can be understood through the concept of ecological balance. Ecosystems rely on stable interactions between species, resources, and environmental conditions. When one element changes significantly, it affects the entire system. For example, loss of habitat forces animals to relocate. Changes in temperature alter food availability. Disruptions in natural cycles affect reproduction and migration. These processes are well documented and form the basis of environmental science. However, the current situation introduces an additional consideration. The scale and synchronization of these changes suggest that multiple systems are being affected at the same time. This reduces the ability of ecosystems to compensate or adapt gradually. When adjustments are required across several levels simultaneously, the overall system becomes more sensitive to further disruption. This sensitivity increases the likelihood that small changes can produce larger and less predictable outcomes. As these developments continue, the distinction between natural variation and systemic imbalance becomes more difficult to define. Natural systems are always changing to some extent. Variation is expected and necessary for long-term stability. The question is not whether change is occurring, but whether the current rate and combination of changes fall within expected limits. When patterns begin to deviate consistently from historical norms, it indicates that underlying conditions may be shifting. This brings the focus back to the broader context established earlier. Weather patterns have become less predictable. The night sky no longer behaves as it once did. Underground pressure has manifested in unexpected ways. Acoustic phenomena in deep environments have raised questions about the limits of current understanding. Now, living systems themselves are showing signs of stress and adaptation that extend beyond typical responses. Each of these developments can be examined individually, but together they form a sequence that is increasingly difficult to separate. At this point, the situation is no longer defined by a single category of events. It represents a convergence of changes across multiple domains, including atmospheric conditions, geological processes, biological systems, and human perception. Understanding this convergence requires more than isolated analysis. It requires recognition of how these elements interact and influence one another over time. As this recognition develops, the final step is not to draw immediate conclusions, but to ask clear and direct questions. Scientific explanations provide essential insight into mechanisms and causes. They explain how processes occur and how systems respond under certain conditions. However, they do not always address the broader meaning of patterns when those processes begin to align in unexpected ways. This leads directly into the central question that emerges from everything that has been observed. Extreme weather events, changes in the sky, instability beneath the ground, and shifts in living systems can all be explained individually through established knowledge. Each has its own set of causes, data, and models. But when these events begin to occur at the same time, with increasing frequency and overlap, the situation becomes more complex. Is this simply a series of independent developments that happen to coincide? Or is it a pattern that indicates a larger shift taking place? If the patterns described in Scripture refer to a period in which multiple signs appear together, then the relevance of those descriptions depends on how the present situation is interpreted. This does not require speculation. It requires observation and honest evaluation of what is already visible. Another question follows naturally from this point. If these changes are recognized, how should they influence response? Awareness alone does not produce action. It must be combined with reflection and decision-making. If patterns are forming, ignoring them does not prevent their continuation. It only reduces the ability to respond effectively. There is also a more personal dimension to consider. Perception plays a critical role in how events are understood. When unusual conditions first appear, they attract attention. Over time, repeated exposure can reduce that attention. What was once considered abnormal can begin to feel routine. This shift does not mean that the events themselves have become less significant. It means that the response to them has changed. At this stage, the most direct question is also the simplest. Do these events still feel unusual? Or have they become part of what is now expected? The answer to this question determines how seriously they are taken and how much attention they receive moving forward. If you are watching this, take a moment to pause and consider what has been presented, not as a source of fear, but as an opportunity to reflect. The purpose of examining these patterns is not to create uncertainty, but to encourage clarity. Reflection allows for a more accurate understanding of both external conditions and internal response. Prayer, in this context, is not presented as a reaction to crisis, but as a means of seeking guidance and maintaining awareness. It provides a way to remain grounded while processing information that may otherwise feel overwhelming. It also reinforces the importance of perspective, reminding us that understanding is not limited to observation alone. Ask for wisdom to interpret what you see. Ask for awareness to recognize what may otherwise be overlooked. Ask for a response that is based on clarity rather than habit. These are not abstract ideas. They are practical steps that influence how situations are approached and how decisions are made. Because in the end, the most significant risk is not always the presence of change, but the absence of recognition. When signals are present but no longer noticed, the ability to respond diminishes. And when the ability to respond diminishes, the consequences extend beyond any single event. The environment is changing in ways that are measurable and observable. The response to those changes is equally important. The question is not only what is happening, but whether it is being understood for what it is.